The settlement of New Haven sat quietly on the edge of Kepler, 442 BS northern continent, where violet grass fields stretched like frozen waves under a pale blue sun. The air smelled faintly of minerals and warm rain, a scent humans had learned to associate with new beginnings. Dr. Marcus Chun walked along the dirt path leading into the colony's small market district, his boots brushing against dew-covered grass. Beside him, his daughter Sarah skipped with the kind of energy only an 8-year-old could maintain so early in the morning. "Daddy, look," she said, pointing toward a cluster of circular plants glowing faintly gold under the sunlight. "They changed color again." Marcus smiled, adjusting the data tablet hanging from his belt. "That's because they track temperature shifts. They're reacting to the heat rising." Sarah tilted her head. "So they can feel the sun?" "In a way," he replied gently. "Everything here reacts to something. Even the soil is alive in its own slow way." Sarah seemed to think about that seriously for a moment, then nodded as if she understood something profound. Then she ran ahead again, her small boots kicking up dust that shimmered faintly in the alien light. Marcus watched her carefully, not out of fear, but habit. New Haven was a frontier colony, but it was considered stable. Safe. At least by human standards. The kind of place where children could run without helmets and scientists could forget, for a few hours, that they were living on a world that once belonged to no one. Around them, the colony was waking up. Farmers moved toward hydroponic domes. Engineers checked atmospheric stabilizers. Children of other families laughed near the communal housing units, their voices mixing in a strange harmony of human accents and alien winds. Marcus passed a group of settlers studying a patch of purple grass that grew in perfect spirals. "Still doing the same pattern?" he asked one of them. The scientist shrugged. "Same as yesterday. Same as last month. It's like the planet refuses randomness." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Or it defines randomness differently than we do." Sarah, now ahead of him, crouched near a small creature that resembled a cross between a rabbit and a crystalline insect. It didn't run away. Instead, it blinked slowly and mirrored her movement, tilting its head when she tilted hers. "It likes me," Sarah called out proudly. "Everything here likes you until it doesn't," Marcus replied half-joking, though his eyes stayed alert. She laughed, not understanding the weight behind his words, and gently placed a finger near the creature. It touched her fingertip once before retreating into the grass like a flicker of light. The market square wasn't far now. Simple structures of reinforced alloy and transparent polymer formed a loose circle where colonists traded supplies, food, and the occasional piece of alien flora studied for research. A vendor waved as Marcus approached. "Morning, Dr. Chen. Fresh harvest came in. The fruit's sweeter today." Marcus nodded. "I'll take some. Sarah's been talking about it since yesterday." Sarah immediately perked up. "The glowing berries." "Those are the ones," Marcus said. She bounced on her heels excitedly. "Can I pick them myself?" "We'll see," he said, unable to hide his amusement. For a moment, everything felt ordinary. Almost peaceful in a way that still felt new to humanity. A fragile peace built on curiosity, science, and the belief that the universe was something to be understood rather than feared. Marcus looked up at the sky out of instinct more than concern. The twin moons were still visible even in daylight, pale shapes watching silently from above. He wondered, as he sometimes did, how long such peace could last in a galaxy as large as this one. Then he looked back at Sarah, who was now examining a fruit stall with complete fascination, her eyes bright with wonder, and he decided not to think about it today. Not while she was smiling like that. The morning continued with its quiet rhythm, but something in the air had begun to shift in ways most people would not immediately notice. Sarah moved from stall to stall in the market square, her excitement never slowing, while Marcus followed a few steps behind, greeting vendors and scanning colony reports on his wrist display between conversations. The settlement felt stable. Predictable. That was the illusion New Haven had been built on. It was Administrator Williams who first noticed the change. He stood near the edge of the square, speaking quietly into a comm device, his expression slowly tightening as the transmission on the other end repeated itself. Marcus caught sight of him and frowned. Something about the man's posture had changed. It wasn't urgency yet. It was recognition of something unwanted. Williams ended the call and walked quickly toward the center of the square. "Dr. Chen," he called out, voice controlled but strained. Marcus straightened. "What's wrong?" Williams hesitated for half a second too long. "We have an orbital signature." Marcus felt his attention sharpen instantly. "Pirates." Williams shook his head. "Not registered. Not local. Large mass. Multiple vessels." Sarah, still holding a fruit she had been inspecting, looked up curiously. "Daddy, what's happening?" Marcus knelt slightly without breaking eye contact with Williams. "Probably just a supply convoy." Williams didn't respond immediately. That silence said more than his words could. Then the second report came through the colony-wide alert channel. 3 massive ships had entered orbit. Imperial designation patterns. Marcus felt a cold weight settle in his stomach, though his face remained calm. He had read about them before. Everyone in frontier science had. Not myths. Not rumors. Just distant encounters described in reports that always ended the same way: compliance, extraction, and silence. Williams exhaled slowly. "They're broadcasting a standard contact protocol." Marcus stood slowly. "And they're requesting immediate administrative presence in the central square." Sarah tugged at Marcus's sleeve. "Daddy, are we going to meet them? Are they traitors?" Marcus looked down at her, forcing a gentle expression. "Something like that." But even as he spoke, the sky changed. A shadow passed over the colony. Then another. Then another. The sunlight dimmed as if the planet itself had taken a breath and forgotten how to release it. People in the square slowly began to look upward. The first ship emerged from orbital descent like a blade cutting through the atmosphere. Sleek. Black. Too precise to feel natural. It did not descend like human craft. It fell with controlled certainty, as if the air itself had agreed to move aside. Then came the second. Then the third. The sound arrived after the sight, a deep rolling pressure that made windows tremble and conversations die mid-sentence. Sarah's earlier excitement faded slightly. "Daddy, those are big." Marcus didn't answer immediately, because now he could see the landing trajectory. They weren't docking. They were arriving. The central square began filling quickly as colonists gathered, unsure whether to panic or wait. Human settlements on the frontier had learned patience. Most threats were misunderstandings. Most dangers could be negotiated. That belief held until the ships fully committed to atmospheric entry. Then the first Imperial shuttle broke formation. It descended like a judgment, cutting through clouds in a straight, deliberate line before stabilizing just above the square. More followed. They landed with absolute precision, forming a perimeter that enclosed the colony's heart. And then silence. A ramp extended from the lead shuttle. Marcus instinctively pulled Sarah closer. "Daddy," she whispered again, sensing the shift even if she didn't understand it. "Stay close," he said quietly. Figures began to emerge. Armored. Uniform. Inhumanly coordinated. Their movements were not rushed. Not cautious. Controlled like instruments executing a known function. The colonists instinctively stepped back as the formation advanced. And at their center walked someone different. Larger. Heavier presence. Not physically towering, but commanding in a way that made space feel occupied even before he moved through it. Commander Vexer. He stopped at the center of the square and looked around as if assessing livestock rather than citizens. Marcus tightened his grip on Sarah's hand without realizing it. William stepped forward, attempting diplomacy before tension could escalate further. "Welcome to New Haven Colony," he said carefully. "We are a peaceful agricultural settlement. If there is a registration requirement." Vexer raised one hand. The gesture was not aggressive. It was final. "Your records are outdated," Vexer said, voice translated through a device that stripped emotion into mechanical clarity. "This world has been reassessed. Tribute conditions have changed." A murmur spread through the colonists. Williams blinked. "Reassessed. The Empire determines value dynamically," Vexer replied. "Your output is insufficient relative to orbital projection." Marcus felt Sarah press closer into him. Williams tried again. We already submitted our quarterly resources. We're a frontier agricultural colony. We don't have surplus capacity for. Your lack of capacity is irrelevant, Vexor interrupted calmly. The words were not shouted. They did not need to be. Around the square, Imperial soldiers began positioning themselves in silence, their weapons not raised but unmistakably present. Sarah looked up at Marcus. Daddy, why are they standing like that? Marcus didn't answer immediately, because now he understood something very clearly. This was not a visit. This was an extraction. And New Haven was no longer being asked. It was being evaluated. The square had gone still in a way that felt unnatural, as if even the wind had learned to pause. Vexor remained at the center of it all, unmoving, his attention sweeping across the colony with the detached precision of someone reviewing numbers rather than lives. Williams forced himself to stand straighter. Commander, with respect, this colony is still developing. Our yields are tied to seasonal growth cycles. If you increase the requirement... You misunderstand, Vexor said calmly. He stepped forward once. That single movement made several colonists instinctively step back. We are not negotiating output, he continued. We are informing you of obligation. Marcus could feel Sarah's fingers tightening around his hand. Not panic yet. Confusion. That fragile stage before fear becomes real. Williams tried again, his voice slightly less steady now. We physically cannot meet increased tribute without starving our population. Vexor tilted his head slightly, as if processing something irrelevant. Population sustainability is your concern, he said. The Empire is not responsible for inefficient local planning. A low murmur spread through the crowd. Fear now had shape, but not direction. One of the colonists spoke up from the side. We're human beings. We can't just... A soldier shifted position slightly. The voice stopped immediately. Vexor raised one hand again, not to silence them, but as if acknowledging background noise. This world has been reclassified, he said. Its value reassessed upward. Tribute requirement is now triple previous allocation. The words landed like a physical impact. Williams shook his head. Triple? That's impossible. We would have to strip food reserves. Medical supplies. Everything. Then you will comply accordingly, Vexor replied. Marcus felt something tighten in his chest that wasn't fear yet. It was recognition. The kind that comes when you realize a conversation was never meant to include your opinion. Sarah looked up again. Daddy, are they angry? Marcus hesitated. No, he said quietly. They're not angry. Then why are they talking like that? He didn't have an answer he could give her. Because anger implied emotion. This was something else. Williams stepped forward again, desperation beginning to break through his professionalism. Commander, listen to me. If you take that much, people will die this winter. Children will. At the word children, Vexor paused. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. But the air changed. His gaze shifted slightly across the crowd, registering smaller figures. Families. Clusters. Children holding hands with parents. To him, it was data. Demographics. Resource consumption units. You are becoming emotional, Vexor said. Williams clenched his fists. I am becoming human. That earned a silence sharper than any weapon. Vexor studied him for a moment, then replied, Your emotional framing is irrelevant to Imperial policy. He turned slightly, addressing the wider colony now. Extraction units will begin collection immediately. Resistance will be logged as non-compliance. The soldiers moved. Not fast. Not rushed. Controlled efficiency. They split into formations, some heading toward storage facilities, others toward residential blocks. Their movements suggested prior mapping, prior knowledge. This was not exploration. This was execution of a schedule. Marcus pulled Sarah slightly behind him without thinking. She peeked around his side. Daddy, where are they going? To get things, he said quietly. What things? He didn't answer. Because one of the soldiers had already passed too close to a storage building, scanning it with a device that projected internal schematics in midair. Another group moved toward the residential section where families lived. That was when a sudden movement broke the square's fragile stillness. A boy, maybe 12, appeared at the edge of the crowd. Tommy Martinez. He had seen the soldiers turning toward his home sector. And like any child who believed the world still followed understandable rules, he ran. "Mom!" he shouted. "They're going to our house." It was not aggression. It was warning. Pure instinct. But in the same moment, one soldier rotated slightly. Sensors misread motion. Training overrode hesitation. A weapon discharged. The energy bolt wasn't meant to kill. It was meant to stop. But Tommy was already moving. The shot missed him. It struck the space just behind where Sarah stood. For a fraction of a second, there was no understanding of what had happened. Marcus heard the sound first. A sharp crack of energy release. Then the sudden absence of noise where it should not have been absent. Sarah's hand loosened. Not dropped. Released. Marcus turned instinctively. And saw her falling. There was no scream. No time for one. She hit the ground softly, almost like she had tripped. But she didn't move again. The world didn't explode. It stopped. Marcus dropped instantly to his knees. "Sarah," he said. No response. "Sarah." His hands reached her before his mind accepted what his eyes were seeing. The small body. The stillness that should not exist. The unnatural quiet of a child who was supposed to be laughing seconds ago. Around them, everything had frozen. Even the soldiers. Even Vexor. Marcus pulled her closer. "Sarah," he repeated, voice breaking for the first time. Her eyes were open, but not seeing anything. The colony square had become a silence so complete it felt like the universe had stepped away. And in that silence, Marcus Chun finally understood what had arrived in New Haven. It was not contact. It was consequence. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Not the colonists. Not the soldiers. Not even the wind that had once carried the smell of alien grass and morning harvests. Marcus held Sarah against his chest, as if stillness could be reversed if he refused to accept it. "Sarah," he whispered again, softer this time, like the volume of his voice might change reality. "Hey, look at me." Her head rested against him, small and impossibly light. Too light. Around them, someone began to scream. Not loudly at first. Just a broken sound that didn't know what shape to take. Then more voices joined it. Williams took one step forward, then stopped, as if his brain refused to connect movement with meaning. "No," he said quietly. "No, no, no." A colonist dropped to their knees near the edge of the square. Another covered their mouth. Someone else backed away from the soldiers as if distance could undo what had already happened. Marcus didn't look at any of them. He couldn't. His entire world had narrowed to the weight in his arms. He checked her instinctively, because science never leaves first. Breathing. Pulse. Response. But there was nothing to measure anymore. Just silence. "Sarah," he said again, but it wasn't a word now. It was a reflex. A failure of acceptance. Behind him, the soldier who had fired shifted slightly, as if recalibrating his stance. The weapon hung idle now. The threat was gone. Or so it assumed. Vexor stepped forward slowly. Not hurried. Not alarmed. He looked down at the scene with mild observation, as if reviewing a minor deviation in an otherwise correct procedure. "That was not intended," he said. The translator rendered it flat, clinical. Marcus froze at those words. Not because they explained anything. Because they didn't. Williams turned sharply. "You shot a child." Vexor tilted his head slightly. The discharge was a defensive response to movement. "That was a child," Williams shouted, voice cracking now. "She wasn't a threat." Vexor paused, as if processing a classification error. "In Imperial operational terms," he said, "unidentified rapid movement near extraction units is categorized as potential interference." Marcus slowly lifted his head. His face was pale, but not empty. Something had begun forming behind his eyes that did not belong to grief alone. "You saw her," Marcus said quietly. Vexor looked at him. Marcus repeated it, voice lower now. Controlled. You saw a child. The biological classification was registered, Vexor replied. Marcus stared at him for a long moment, then looked back down at Sarah. Her small hand was still partially curled, as if she had been mid-thought when the universe stopped her. He adjusted her gently against him, almost carefully, like a parent fixing a blanket. Around him, the square remained in chaos. But Marcus no longer heard it properly. It was distant now, like noise behind glass. Williams stepped closer, shaking. Doctor, we need medical. Please. Marcus didn't answer. He already knew. A medical team arrived moments later, too late before they even touched the scene. One of them knelt beside Marcus, scanning with trembling hands. The device chirped once, then went silent. The medic lowered their head. I'm sorry, they whispered. Marcus nodded slightly, as if confirming a result in an experiment. Then stood up slowly, still holding Sarah. The movement caused several people to step back instinctively. Not because of threat. Because of what he looked like. Something had changed in him. The soldiers noticed it too. A few shifted their weapons slightly. Not aiming, but readying. Vexor watched Marcus carefully now, for the first time showing the faintest adjustment in posture. Not concern. Assessment. Marcus turned his head slightly, finally looking directly at him. And in that moment, every part of the square felt like it had been reduced to a single point of focus. You called her collateral damage, Marcus said. His voice was calm. Too calm. Vexor responded without hesitation. The outcome is classified as unfortunate, but within acceptable operational parameters. Something in Marcus' expression tightened. Not outward rage. Deeper than that. Something that had passed anger entirely and entered a colder place. He looked down once more at Sarah, then gently adjusted his grip, as if preparing to carry something fragile across a long distance. I understand, he said quietly. Williams stepped forward quickly. Marcus, don't. But Marcus had already turned. He walked forward through the square, carrying his daughter. Step by step. Past colonists frozen in shock. Past soldiers who did not yet know whether to intervene. Past a world that had just learned the difference between misunderstanding and irreversibility. He didn't look at anyone. Not even Vexor. But everyone looked at him. Because something about the way he moved made it clear this moment was not ending here. It was only beginning. The colony square remained frozen in a state that no protocol had ever accounted for. Marcus walked through it slowly, carrying Sarah in his arms, her small body resting against him like something impossibly delicate that the universe had failed to protect. No one stopped him. Not because they couldn't. Because something in the way he moved made interference feel like a mistake that would echo far beyond this moment. Behind him, voices rose again, fragmented and panicked. Medical team, move. Get the children inside. Shut down the landing perimeter. Someone contact orbit. But none of it reached him anymore. Marcus reached the communication center without fully remembering the path. His hands were steady. That was what frightened the few people who followed him at a distance. Not shaking. Not breaking. Steady. Williams appeared behind him, breathing hard. Marcus, listen to me. We need to handle this through proper channels. If we escalate... Marcus stopped walking. Just for a moment. Williams froze too. Marcus didn't turn around. I'm not escalating anything, he said quietly. Then he continued forward. Inside the communications hub, the air was colder. Artificial. Controlled. A place built for messages between worlds that had never expected to carry something like this. Marcus laid Sarah gently on a nearby medical bench. He did it carefully, adjusting her position as if she might still feel discomfort. One of the technicians tried to step forward. Marcus raised a hand slightly. Not aggressively. Just enough. The technician stopped. Marcus turned to the console. For a few seconds, he simply stood there, looking at it, as if waiting for it to offer a different outcome. Then he began working. He bypassed standard authorization layers with the calm precision of someone who had designed parts of the system and remembered exactly where the weak points were. Behind him, William spoke again, quieter now. Marcus, Imperial jamming is active. Even if you send something, it won't reach. It will, Marcus interrupted softly. Not as a prediction. As certainty. He rerouted the signal through agricultural satellites, then through deep-field relay arrays meant for scientific surveys. Emergency redundancy systems flickered as he forced power allocation beyond safe limits. Alarms began to trigger in the background. He ignored them. Sarah lay still behind him. He didn't look back again. The first transmission attempt failed. Marcus adjusted. The second attempt partially connected, then dropped. He adjusted again. His fingers moved faster now, not frantic, but focused in a way that suggested he was no longer thinking about consequences in the present tense. Only completion. Williams stepped closer. If they detect off-channel broadcasting, the Empire will classify this as rebellion. They'll. Marcus finally spoke without turning. Good. That single word ended the conversation. A third signal spike locked in. The system stabilized. The communication array hummed as it forced a burst transmission through layers of interference that were never meant to be broken. Marcus opened the global channel routing matrix. Then he began uploading. Security footage from the square. Sensor logs. Medical readouts. Audio recordings. Every second of what had happened, preserved in sterile clarity that no one could dismiss as misunderstanding. And then he began to speak. This is Dr. Marcus Chun, New Haven Colony. His voice was steady, but the room behind him felt like it was holding its breath. Today, Imperial forces entered our settlement under the pretense of resource assessment. A pause. Not for emotion. For structure. They demanded tribute beyond our capacity. Another pause. They opened fire during their operation. Behind him, someone quietly covered their mouth. Marcus continued. My daughter, Sarah Chun, age 8, was killed during that discharge. The words landed without volume, but they hit harder than any shout. He did not stop. They have classified her death as acceptable collateral damage. This time, his voice shifted slightly. Not louder. Colder. I am transmitting full evidence of this event to all human colonies and Earth Central Command. The system confirmed uplink stabilization. A final buffer warning flashed. He overrode it. The transmission engaged. A pulse of encoded data launched into deep space, riding relay chains beyond Imperial suppression grids, beyond local orbital control, beyond anything New Haven had ever used at this scale. And once it left, it could not be taken back. Marcus stood still as the system confirmed delivery initiation. Only then did his shoulders lower slightly. Just a fraction. As if something inside him had finished locking into place. Behind him, Sarah remained on the medical bench. Still. Quiet. Gone. Williams spoke softly. Marcus, what have you done? Marcus didn't answer immediately. He looked at the transmission status screen, watching it propagate outward. To colonies. To fleets. To Earth. Then he said quietly, I told them the truth. Outside the communication center, the Imperial soldiers were still collecting resources. Still operating under the assumption that nothing significant had changed. They had no idea that something had already left New Haven. Something that would not stop spreading. And would not stop what came next. The first response did not come from Earth. It came from silence breaking. Deep space relay stations along the Centauri corridor registered an incoming burst transmission flagged with priority codes that had not been used in decades. Automated systems attempted standard classification. Civilian incident. Localized tragedy. Security anomaly. Then the contents finished decoding. And every assumption collapsed. Within minutes, the message was no longer one transmission. It was everywhere. Human colonies across multiple systems received it simultaneously. Mining stations on the asteroid belt. Agricultural domes on Titan. Research outposts drifting beyond Neptune's orbit. Even diplomatic vessels half a sector away. At first, There was confusion. Then review. Then silence. Then anger. Not loud anger. Controlled. The kind that does not need expression to exist. On Mars, Fleet Command paused mid-exercise as the footage played across every tactical display at once. No one spoke during the first viewing. Not because they were ordered to remain silent, but because no one could find the correct words in real time. On Europa Station, a junior officer replayed the clip twice before realizing his hands were shaking. On the outer colonies, entire shifts stopped working without instruction. And at the center of it all, Earth Command received the transmission directly. Admiral Elena Vasquez watched it once in full. Then again. Then she did not move for several seconds after it ended. Her expression did not break immediately. It hardened. Like something inside her had been placed under extreme pressure and chosen to become solid instead of shattering. A child. A father. A square. A weapon discharge. A voice saying, "Acceptable collateral damage." She closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. When she opened them again, she was no longer watching a tragedy. She was reading a declaration. She activated a secure channel. "Priority Omega broadcast," she said. Her voice was controlled, but every officer in the room understood what that control meant. It meant decision had already been made internally. The system acknowledged. Across human space, every active military node received the same alert. Then the message followed. All personnel are to cease non-essential operations. All command structures are to initiate alert status orange. A pause. This is not a drill. No one asked for clarification. They didn't need it. Vasquez continued. Review the attached transmission from New Haven Colony in full. Her eyes did not leave the screen as she spoke. Effective immediately, all human defense assets are authorized for full mobilization readiness. Another pause. Longer this time. Then the final line. If you are hearing this, you already understand why. She cut the channel. For a moment, the command room remained still. Then the first ship-wide mobilization orders were executed. And something that had never fully happened before across human space began to occur with terrifying efficiency. Unity. Not political. Not ideological. Instinctive. Ships that had been docked for years powered up without ceremony. Training fleets shifted into combat formation without asking permission. Civilian vessels broadcast emergency conversion protocols and began stripping non-essential systems for weapons integration. Engineers returned to ships they had retired from. Admirals who had stepped down years ago reactivated their commissions without paperwork. There were no debates. No votes. No delays. Because none of that mattered anymore. On one ship, a young communications officer quietly placed a photograph into his uniform pocket before securing his station. No one asked what it was. Everyone already knew. Across multiple systems, the same pattern repeated. Families were checked once. Then checked again. Then secured. And then the fleets began assembling. Not as scattered military groups, but as something far more dangerous. A coordinated human response that had been refined over centuries of internal conflict, survival, and adaptation. In the background of every command channel, Marcus Chun's transmission remained pinned. Not as evidence anymore. As purpose. Admiral Vasquez stood alone in her private office for a moment, staring at the rotating map of human space. Then she spoke quietly. "Find out who did this." There was no question what this meant. A technician responded carefully. "We already have Imperial signatures confirmed in the orbital window, Admiral." She shook her head slightly. "No," she said. "Not just who fired the shot." Her eyes narrowed. "Who gave the order?" Outside Earth Command, the planet continued turning beneath its atmosphere. Life continued for those who had not yet seen the message. But above them, in the quiet dark between stars, something had already begun moving. Not toward diplomacy. Not toward inquiry. Toward response. And somewhere in that vast silence, humanity had stopped being a scattered species, and had started becoming a single force. Commander Vexer had expected noise. He had expected panic, scattered resistance, perhaps even coordinated pleading once the initial shock of enforcement settled. What he did not expect was how quickly New Haven became quiet again. Not peaceful quiet. Controlled quiet. The kind that happens when people stop reacting emotionally and start observing. Imperial units continued extraction operations across the colony, cataloging resources, sealing cargo, and transferring data from local systems. From their perspective, everything was proceeding normally. Efficient. Predictable. Exactly as it should be. Vexer stood near the center of the square, reviewing updated allocation metrics on a projection interface hovering in front of him. The incident with the juvenile human had already been logged, classified, and archived. An unfortunate deviation. Contained. Resolved. That was what the report would say. But something kept him from dismissing it fully. Not guilt. Not concern. Something closer to recalibration. His attention drifted briefly toward the communication center where the human male had entered earlier carrying the body. The system had marked him as non-threatening. Civilian. Scientist class. Low priority. Yet the behavioral pattern since the incident did not align with expected trauma responses. No collapse. No negotiation attempt. No submission. Instead, transmission. Unauthorized. External burst signal. Vexer's interface flickered with a delayed alert. Imperial jamming integrity. Partially bypassed. He narrowed his eyes slightly. That was not supposed to be possible here. Commander, one of the subordinates reported. We are detecting unusual signal activity beyond orbital interference thresholds. Human systems? Vexer asked. Unclear origin. Signal dispersion suggests deep relay chaining. Vexer paused for half a second longer than usual, then dismissed it. Local panic response, he said. Continue extraction. But even as he spoke, something in the environment had changed. The colony no longer behaved like a passive settlement. People were no longer scattered or disorganized. They were watching. Not running. Not pleading. Watching. On the edge of the square, Marcus Chun reappeared. Still carrying nothing now. His hands were empty. His shirt still marked. His face unchanged in expression. But he was not the same man who had stood there earlier. Vexer noticed him immediately. Their eyes met briefly across the distance. Marcus did not look away first. That detail registered. Unexpected. Illogical. A soldier stepped slightly closer to Marcus, raising a hand as if to redirect him. Marcus walked past without acknowledging him. The soldier hesitated, then stepped aside. Vexer watched this interaction carefully. Human behavioral inconsistency was increasing. He activated a low-level scan of colony-wide communications. That was when he saw it. The transmission. Spreading. Not local. Not isolated. Propagating beyond Imperial suppression range. His expression tightened slightly. Confirm uplink status, he ordered. A technician responded quickly. Signal is outside standard containment parameters. It has already breached multiple relay suppression layers. Vexer turned slowly toward the communication center. For the first time since arrival, he moved with something resembling urgency. Inside the command layer of his mind, classification systems began recalculating risk. Human species profile, non-militarized agricultural frontier colony. Revision conflict detected. He stopped walking. Something was wrong. Not tactically. Structurally. The humans were not responding like a submissive population. They were responding like a distributed network. He had seen rebellion before. Disorganized. Emotional. Localized. This was not that. This was coordinated activation. But it made no sense. They had no known centralized military infrastructure in this sector. No fleet presence confirmed within immediate orbital range. No registered escalation doctrine. And yet, a distant rumble echoed faintly through the atmosphere. Not from landing craft. From orbit. Vexer looked up. For the first time, the sky did not feel empty. His tactical display flickered again. New contacts. Multiple. Then dozens. Then hundreds. emerging from stealth signatures across the system. Ships. Human ships. Not entering. Revealing. Vexor's interface struggled to categorize them. Civilian identifiers vanished. New classifications replaced them. Military-grade signatures confirmed. Dozens of vessels shed false transponder codes simultaneously. What had been logged as supply transports, scientific vessels, and civilian haulers were no longer pretending. Hull structures shifted. Weapon arrays activated. Fleet coordination networks came online in seconds. Vexor took a slow step back. That was the first time in his entire career he had physically reacted to battlefield data without ordering himself to remain still. A subordinate voice broke through comms. "Commander, we are receiving an open-channel broadcast." "From who?" Vexor asked, though he already suspected the answer. A pause. "Human fleet designation unknown. They are broadcasting across all Imperial frequencies." The channel opened, and a human voice filled the square. Not panicked. Not emotional. Calm. Absolute. "All Imperial units within Kepler 442 orbit," it said. "You are ordered to stand down and prepare for inspection." A pause. Then the next line. "You have killed one of ours." Silence followed. Not dramatic silence. Operational silence. The kind that exists before systems decide what reality is going to become. Vexor stared upward. Ships were now fully visible in orbit. And for the first time, he understood something that had not been included in any Imperial briefing. The humans had never been unarmed. They had been waiting. And now they were no longer hiding. The Imperial fleet did not realize it was already compromised. That was the first mistake. From orbit, Admiral Zexely's task force began standard formation protocols, expecting resistance patterns consistent with frontier defense units. The human presence, according to every Imperial database, should have been fragmented, reactive, and poorly coordinated. Instead, the moment full human fleet emergence completed, every Imperial sensor began failing in subtle ways. Not destruction. Interference. Confusion. False positives resolving into corrected threats too late to act on. On the bridge of the lead Imperial cruiser, alarms began stacking faster than they could be silenced. Contact density increasing. Multiple unidentified signatures confirmed. Reclassify. Wait, that's impossible. Those are civilian codes. No, they're weapons platforms. Zexely stepped forward, narrowing all four of his eyes at the tactical display. "Stabilize the readings," he ordered sharply. "Human forces cannot exceed projected colonial capacity." But the display did not stabilize. It expanded. Because the human ships were no longer hiding. They were shedding their disguises in perfect synchronization. Across the system, vessels once labeled as cargo carriers split open along engineered seams. External plating folded away like petals, revealing hardened internal structures built not for transport, but for war. Weapons that had been masked as mining equipment, atmospheric processors, and scientific arrays powered online simultaneously. And every activation was timed. Not chaotic. Not reactive. Coordinated. On the human flagship, Admiral Vasquez watched the Imperial confusion unfold with absolute stillness. "Begin phase reveal," she said. Across the fleet, a single command propagated. "Drop charades." And humanity stopped pretending. The transformation was immediate. Civilian hulls dissolved into layered combat plating. Long-range rail systems extended from concealed bays. Fighter squadrons launched from disguised cargo compartments that had never been cargo compartments at all. What the Empire had assumed were scattered observers of galactic trade routes were suddenly revealed as a unified war doctrine that had been hiding in plain sight. Zexely took a step back. "This is deception," he said slowly. "They embedded military assets under civilian registration." His voice trailed off as the scale updated again. Not assets. Entire fleets. Captain-level human vessels locked onto Imperial formations within seconds of exposure. Targeting systems synchronized without visible central command. That was what disturbed Imperial analysts most. There was no visible coordination node. No single controlling intelligence. Yet every human ship moved as if it had already anticipated the entire battle. On the Vengeance-class cruiser, hidden among the human formation, Captain Rodriguez observed the Imperial fleet with cold precision. "Targets acquired," his weapons officer reported. Rodriguez didn't blink. "Identify priority threats." The system highlighted 3 Imperial cruisers immediately, then re-ranked them. Not by size, by behavioral history. Rodriguez leaned forward slightly. "Interesting, sir. They're tagging command behavior patterns," he said. "Not just ships." The realization spread across human command channels simultaneously. They weren't just fighting vessels. They were hunting decision-makers. On an Imperial fighter wing, pilots launched intercept patterns toward what they believed were soft civilian targets. They never reached them. Mid-flight, their targeting systems flickered, then inverted. Their own navigation computers began recalculating trajectories based on false environmental data injected directly into their onboard systems. "System override," one pilot shouted. "I've lost control." Engines responding to external command input. "This is impossible." Captain Singh's destroyer, hidden among the fleet until seconds ago, activated its countermeasure suite. "Micro-drone deployment," Singh ordered calmly. Thousands of microscopic units dispersed into space like dust. To Imperial sensors, they were debris. To Imperial fighters, they were harmless interference. To Imperial systems, they were already inside. Within seconds, entire squadrons of Imperial fighters began breaking formation as onboard systems were silently rewritten. Weapon locks disengaged. Navigation rerouted. Combat protocols overridden. Not destroyed. Captured. "Sir," an officer reported in disbelief aboard Zexali's bridge. "Our fighters are redirecting." "Redirecting where?" A pause. "Back toward our own formations." Zexali's eyes widened slightly. "That's not possible." But it was happening anyway. On the human flagship, Vasquez finally spoke again. "They're adapting faster than expected." No one responded. They didn't need to, because the Empire's advantage had already collapsed. It was not numbers. It was assumption. And assumption was now gone. Rodriguez's ship fired the first decisive volley. Not a warning shot. Not a test. A calculated strike designed to collapse the lead cruiser's shielding grid by targeting its weakest harmonic frequency. The beam tore through space like a line being drawn across reality. Imperial shields flared, then failed in segments. Explosions erupted along the cruiser's dorsal structure as secondary systems overloaded in cascading sequence failures. "Direct hit confirmed," weapons officer said. Rodriguez watched the burning vessel for half a second, then said, "Good. Now the next one." Across the battlefield, human ships advanced not as scattered units, but as a synchronized hunting formation. Every movement had purpose. Every target had meaning. The Empire tried to respond with overwhelming firepower. But it was like trying to stop a storm by shooting at individual raindrops. Captain Singh's voice came through comms again, almost calm enough to be mistaken for casual conversation. "Scratch another 12 fighters. They're learning fast, but not fast enough." On the Imperial bridge, Zexali finally understood the nature of what he was facing. "This isn't a defense fleet," he whispered. His subordinate looked at him. "Sir." Zexali stared at the burning wreckage forming across the tactical display. "This is a response doctrine." A pause. "A punishment doctrine." Outside the ship, human forces closed in. Not recklessly. Not emotionally. Precisely. And for the first time in Imperial history, the galaxy's dominant military force found itself not outgunned, but outthought, outplanned, and already losing. The Imperial formation collapsed in stages, not all at once. At first, it was denial. Zexali's officers continued issuing standard countermeasures, attempting to re-establish formation integrity as if discipline alone could correct the unfolding disaster. Shield matrices were reinforced. Fighter wings were recalled. Heavy cruisers attempted to create overlapping fire zones. But every adjustment arrived too late. Human ships were always already where the Empire did not want them to be. On Admiral Vasquez's tactical display, The battlefield looked less like chaos and more like a system being solved. Not destroyed. Solved. Imperial communication grid is fragmenting, a technician reported. Interference source. Vasquez didn't look away from the display. They don't have one anymore. A pause. Explain. They're decentralized, she said quietly. No single relay. No command choke point. Every ship is acting as both node and executor. Another officer leaned forward. So if we disrupt command vessels... There aren't command vessels, Vasquez interrupted. Silence followed that. Because that changed everything. In traditional warfare, removing leadership caused collapse. Here, leadership was everywhere. And nowhere. Across the battlefield, human ships tightened their formation into adaptive clusters. Each cluster behaved like a living organism responding to the environment in real time. Imperial admirals attempted to isolate segments. They found that every isolated segment was still fully operational. And still lethal. On the Vengeance, Captain Rodriguez tracked Zexali's flagship. It's trying to pull back toward the outer ring, his officer said. Course prediction. Rodriguez studied the trajectory. They're retreating to regroup. Will it work? He didn't answer immediately. Then, not before we finish this. He gave a single command. Focus fire on propulsion and comm arrays. Leave hull integrity secondary. The intent was clear. Not destruction first. Containment. Control. On the Imperial flagship, alarms screamed continuously now. Entire sections of the ship were blacked out or burning. Internal systems had begun to fail in unpredictable cascades as human cyber warfare continued to propagate through captured fighter networks. Zexali stood motionless at the center of his bridge. For the first time in his career, he did not issue an order. Because every order he could think of was already accounted for by the enemy. Sir, a subordinate said carefully, we are receiving surrender advisories from multiple vessels. Zexali's jaw tightened. Surrender, he repeated. Yes, sir. They are requesting terms. He turned slightly, and saw it. The human fleet was not just attacking. It was pausing between strikes. Waiting. Measuring. Not rushing toward total annihilation. But ensuring structure remained intact enough to communicate defeat. That realization hit harder than any weapon. This is intentional, Zexali said quietly. No one responded. Because they were beginning to understand. The humans were not simply winning. They were teaching. Across multiple crippled Imperial ships, emergency channels activated. Human boarding teams began advancing. Not as berserk attackers. As disciplined units executing controlled entry operations. They breached hull sections with surgical precision, avoiding unnecessary destruction of critical systems. One Imperial officer watching from a secondary camera whispered, "They're preserving us." Zexali heard it through internal comms. He finally turned toward the main view screen. The human fleet commander appeared. Admiral Vasquez. Calm. Unshaken. Behind her, countless ships held position like predators waiting for the final signal. Zexali activated the channel. Human commander, he said, voice strained but controlled. Cease this assault. You have already demonstrated tactical superiority. Vasquez regarded him for a moment. Then replied, This is not a demonstration. A pause. This is containment. Zexali frowned slightly. You have achieved victory conditions. What more do you require? Something shifted in Vasquez's expression. Not anger. Resolution. We require accountability, she said. Silence. Zexali tried to respond, but she continued. You entered human space with intent to extract resources from a protected colony. Another pause. You killed a child. That word echoed across every surviving Imperial channel still connected to the battle. Zexali's expression tightened. The incident was an operational accident. A non-targeted discharge. You are escalating an interstellar conflict over an unintended casualty. Vasquez leaned forward slightly. For the first time, her voice sharpened. There was nothing unintended about the systems that allowed it to happen. Silence again. Behind her, Human fleet formations held steady. Not advancing. Not retreating. Waiting for direction. Zexley exhaled slowly. "What do you want?" Vasquez answered without hesitation. "The commander responsible." A pause. "The one who decided our children were acceptable losses." Zexley understood then that this was no longer about battlefield outcome. It was about meaning. And meaning, once established, could not be negotiated away. Around them, the Imperial fleet burned and broke apart in controlled stages, each vessel systematically neutralized. Not erased. Disarmed. Preserved. As if humanity intended them to remember exactly how defeat felt. And somewhere deep within Imperial command structures, a new realization began to spread. This war had not begun with fleets. It had begun with a child. And it would not end until humanity decided it had been answered. The first sign that the war had ended was not peace. It was silence across the front lines. Not the silence of destruction, but the silence of withdrawal. Human fleets held position across multiple systems, maintaining containment formations while Imperial forces either surrendered or retreated in fragmented clusters toward core territories. There was no celebration. No victory broadcast. Only confirmation logs and secured transmissions. On Earth, the atmosphere felt unchanged, but everything in orbit told a different story. Admiral Vasquez stood in the Central Command Observatory, watching reports scroll across layered holographic displays. Fleet losses, minimal. Territory status, stabilized. Imperial response capacity, degraded across all engagement zones. And then the final line updated. Target located. Commander Vexer. Captured. A technician approached carefully. "Admiral, he's been secured in transport custody. Awaiting transfer authorization." Vasquez nodded once. "Prepare New Haven detention protocols." The technician hesitated. "Ma'am, there's also a request from Dr. Marcus Chun." That name paused the room. Vasquez turned slightly. "What kind of request?" "He asked to be present during interrogation." Silence followed. Then she said, "Approve it." On New Haven Colony, the square had changed. Not physically at first, but emotionally. Where panic and chaos had once spread, now there was absence. The landing zone was empty. Imperial forces were gone. Only scorched marks and repaired structures remained. And at the center of it all, a small memorial had begun to form. Flowers. Items. Silent offerings. Children stood nearby, watching adults place objects with careful hands. Marcus Chun stood in front of it all. Older now than he had been days before the war began. Time had not passed differently. He had simply moved through it differently. When the transport arrived, no one spoke. Commander Vexer was escorted out under human guard. He looked different now. Not physically changed, but stripped of certainty. His eyes moved across the colony slowly, taking in reconstruction efforts, civilian movement, and the absence of Imperial control. Marcus stepped forward. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Vexer said quietly, "You destroyed an empire." Marcus did not respond immediately. He looked at him for a long time. Then said, "No." A pause. "You did." Vexer frowned slightly. "That is not accurate. The Empire's response was proportional enforcement. Your species escalated beyond reason." Marcus stepped closer. His voice was calm. "Do you remember her?" Vexer hesitated. Then, carefully, "The offspring." Marcus did not correct him. He simply held a small photograph in his hand. Sarah, smiling, holding a flower. "She had a name," Marcus said. Vexer looked at it. Something unfamiliar flickered in his expression. Not understanding. Not yet. Recognition of consequence. "Yes," he said slowly. "Sarah Chun." Marcus nodded. "That name cost your empire 47 fleets." Silence followed. Vexer looked past him toward the memorial gathering outside. Children were playing. Alien and human together. Unarmed. Alive. "I still do not understand," Vexer said quietly. "She was one life among billions." Marcus finally exhaled. Not in anger. In exhaustion. "That's why you lost," he said. "Because you were counting wrong." Later, in the detention facility, Vexer sat behind reinforced glass. Across from him, Marcus remained seated. Between them lay silence that had weight. "You have achieved your objective," Vexer said finally. "My people have withdrawn. The Empire has altered its policy toward your species." Marcus nodded slightly. "That's not the objective." Vexer studied him. "Then what is?" Marcus looked at the photograph again, then placed it on the table between them. "To make sure no one ever calls that acceptable again." A pause. Outside, children's laughter echoed faintly through the colony gardens. Vexer followed the sound for a moment, then back to Marcus. "I understand now," he said slowly. Marcus didn't respond, because he knew that wasn't fully true. Not yet. But it was enough. Months passed. The galaxy did not return to what it was. It reorganized. The Galactic Empire remained, but no longer unchallenged. Entire sectors aligned with the emerging human-led cooperative structure. Others declared independence under the implicit protection of human fleet presence. Human ships no longer hid. They patrolled, not as conquerors, but as boundaries, markers of consequence. And on New Haven Colony, the memorial grew. Sarah Chun's name was no longer just remembered. It was spoken as a warning and a promise. A warning of what happens when life is dismissed. A promise that it would not happen again without response. One evening, as twin moons rose over the purple grass, Marcus stood alone at the memorial. A small child approached quietly. Alien. Young. Curious. She placed a flower down gently, then looked up. "Did she really change the galaxy?" the child asked. Marcus knelt beside her. "Yes," he said. "By herself." He shook his head slightly. "No." He looked at the stars above. "By being loved enough that the galaxy had no choice but to answer." And far above, human warships continued their silent patrol. Not waiting for war, but ensuring that when the universe forgot what mattered, it would be reminded again.